Ole Miss is going to face Florida for one of the biggest games in school history because of what it could mean. It's important that we bring in some outside perspective on this. We're going to talk to David Cohn today on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America, and that's all thanks to you. On today's show, we're going to be talking about this weekend's game between the Ole Miss Rebels and the Florida Gators. We're going to talk Trinidad Chambliss, playoffs, all of that good stuff with our friend David Cohn from Crane & Company, which you can check out on the Daily Wire podcast network as well. Give them a subscribe to that. So it should be a lot of fun with what is going on. All right, David, one thing that's interesting about this game, what is the one thing going into this Ole Miss Florida game that has your interest piqued?
Well, first off, Steven, thank you so much for having me, man. It's an honor to be with you. Like you said, from an outsider's perspective, the most interesting thing is to see how Ole Miss manages expectations. And this has been my one criticism of Lane Kiffin over the years. I mean, we saw how it ended with Tennessee and USC and the Raiders, and even his time as offensive coordinator there at Alabama. And my criticism has been, well, I just don't know how focused on winning Lane Kiffin is. One of the best play callers in the world. If my life was on the line and it's 3rd and 3 at the goal line, who do I want calling a play? Lane Kiffin would be a great option. How great of a head coach is he? How much has he matured? Is he focused on winning? There's so many off the field distractions and the trolling element. But now I look at this Lane Kiffin and I think you still have that element of him trolling other media members and other coaches, and it's in good fun, but it doesn't seem to be a distraction. He does seem to be more focused on the game and focused on winning. I've likened it to Bryson DeChambeau. Remember how Bryson DeChambeau on the PGA Tour was so unlikable for so long? Not necessarily by me, but that was kind of the narrative about him. And then he starts doing podcasts on YouTube and starts doing more media hits, and now he's one of the more likable figures. I think Lane Kiffin has sort of had a similar trajectory and a similar arc, and that's why I think Ole Miss is a really great place for him. But we've seen him start hot before, seen him fall off, later in the season, and I just think this team looks focused. His staff looks focused. The players look focused, and everything about this game. Every single thing about this game makes you think Ole Miss is going to win, right? DJ Lagway gets pulled for Florida. They're giving up over 200 yards of rushing with a defense that was very, very strong at the beginning of the year. How can Ole Miss handle success? How can they handle expectations now that they're the front runner and they're being hunted? I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting because the atmosphere – one thing that's really cool, David, is, other schools that are, quote, blue bloods of what's going on, they've had games and moments to where it felt like a coronation was happening and it almost feels like no big deal. If there was a game like this at Alabama, like there is, it's probably not a big deal. But the Ole Miss fans, you can feel the excitement because of what this game means. And on the secondary market, tickets are going for $300, and this is against the 3-win Florida team, a game that you're favored by 15.5 points. I do believe that this atmosphere and this crowd is going to provide the energy that kind of propels this Ole Miss team to a big run to where this game could look increasingly, I don't know, I don't want to say blowout, but you could see the best version of Ole Miss show up in this game.
Well, and if that's what we see, I mean, a win would be enough because we're at the point in the season when you only have one loss and you're staring down the barrel of the college football playoff and possibly making the conference championship game. Just winning at this point is enough. If they do what you're talking about and they win in that sort of fashion and they really blow Florida out, that's going to get a lot of people's attention across the country, particularly in a sport where the postseason is sort of selected subjectively, right? I mean, they can say that margin of victory doesn't come come into play, but these are still human beings. This isn't objective metrics for the college football playoff. But yeah, I mean, talking about there really is something to being the hunter versus being the hunted. You talked about Georgia and Alabama and LSU. Everybody wants to beat them every time you step on the field. It doesn't matter if you're Kentucky or Mississippi State or who it might be. You want to go beat Georgia when you line up. Alabama's going to get everyone's best shot. That hasn't necessarily been the case week in and week out every year for Ole Miss, but now Florida, a very, very proud college football blue blood program, has a chance to really sort of mess up and throw a wrench in the situation for Ole Miss. That's what I'm excited to see from their perspective, is how much can they really bow up the way they did against Georgia. Quite frankly, they fired Billy Napier after a win, mind you, at Mississippi State, had the bye week, then got ready for a rivalry game, played Georgia really tough in a rivalry game. Then obviously they get blown out by Kentucky. How much fight do they have in them? How much pride do they have to say, well, can we at least, if we're not going to make the college football playoff, can we at least do our part to keep Ole Miss out?
Yeah, one thing that was interesting, I think I heard on the SEC network during the Kentucky game that the largest comeback that Florida has had in 60 years is 10 points. Does that sound like just a weird stat to you?
Yeah. Yes, that sounds weird. 10 points in 60 years. Wow.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's not right and somebody made a mistake on that. But I promise I heard that in the SEC network broadcast. And if that's the case, I mean, if you get up to a 14-point lead, this game's over, just historically speaking.
Well, and part of me thinks that, okay, well, in the Urban Meyer years and in the Steve Spurrier years, they probably weren't trailing that often because they were winning a lot of those games and they were beating people. But yeah, it hasn't been pretty in Gainesville for a while. I'm a little bit surprised to hear that stat. But again, to your point, okay, let's just say that happens. Let's say Ole Miss is up by 14 at the end of the first half. They're up by 14. Again, is this the type of team to let off the gas, or is this the type of team to go for the jugular? I know what Kirby Smart's doing, right? And speaking about Kirby Smart in Georgia, Ole Miss had a lead in that game. Quite frankly, every SEC team except for Kentucky has had a lead on Georgia at some point, and they've come back and they've won them all except for the Alabama game. Is Ole Miss the type of team, and is Lane Kiffin the type of coach who can go for the jugular, put these teams away, solidify their spot in the college football playoff, and once there, to then say, that's not good enough. We didn't just want to make it here. We want to move forward and win football games when we make the CFP.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of. And you just look back at that Georgia game that you mentioned. Ole Miss's one missed tackle on a 4th and 2 away from getting the ball back on Georgia's 40-yard line, up 9 points, when they've scored 5 straight touchdowns on drives.
Yeah.
It is not hard to imagine that one tackle, which they had the play made. That was a great run by the running back, but they would be 10-0 right now and ranked 2nd in the country.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'll tell you when I really thought that game was over, leading in the first half, like I said, no huge surprise, because I've seen Georgia get into these deficits. And then they go and make their halftime adjustments and they perform well in the second half. But when Ole Miss scored on that hitch route, just free release over there into the boundary, simple pitch and catch, and he takes that for a touchdown, I thought, man, Georgia might be in trouble. And so, again, that sort of gets back here to how well can you put these teams away in these games where you really need to. And there's another point that I was wanting to make with you, because I've been thinking about this a lot the last few weeks since Hugh Freeze got fired at Auburn, when I've been thinking about, okay, why is Lane Kiffin so much more focused right now on winning and the most sought after name in the coaching market right now? Hugh Freeze, till he got hired at Auburn, was a great evaluator at the quarterback position and developing that talent. And he needed to go get a quarterback after back-to-back years of Peyton Thorne in a way that Lane Kiffin really didn't. It seemed like Austin Simmons was going to be a great heir apparent to Jackson Dart, the all-time passing leader who passed Eli Manning. Austin Simmons was going to take over. And that's what happened early in the season, until an injury, and all of a sudden Trinidad Chambliss comes in, because Lane Kiffin did the due diligence to go find this kid and tell his staff, I want to go get the best backup quarterback we can possibly have here at Ole Miss, even if it's Division II. He brings a guy like that in. Not only does he step up to the plate when they need him most, but he's top 5 in the Heisman. So again, just more kudos to Lane Kiffin and what he's been able to do and the way he's been able to manage this team, particularly this season.
Yeah, when we come back, we will talk to David about Trinidad Chambliss and specifically, and talk a little bit more about this football game, which it could be a really exciting game. But first, I do want to let you know this episode is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep by tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. And if you need parts for a project fast, Supply House has next-day delivery. I mean, talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can help save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. And their Trademaster perks, like priority shipping or prices, a dedicated support line, that's available too as well. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5. That's SHCollege5, all one word, for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on this video as well. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcast you're listening to and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps all of this free. Locked On is getting ready to change the game again, all in the name of having fun following your team. It's coming in December. More details when we have them. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in the entire country. That's a pretty cool stat whenever you think about that. All right, David, one thing that's interesting, and you mentioned Trinidad Chambliss right before the break. And one thing that's cool is everybody says that Lane Kiffin is a genius calling plays and all of that. And Lane Kiffin, like all head coaches, has a little bit of an ego. But what makes Lane Kiffin special is in the area where everybody thinks he's great. Ole Miss went into the Ferris State playbook whenever they saw Trinidad Chambliss, took concepts and ideas. Ole Miss was willing to adapt what they're doing to this player. And if you look at it, Trinidad he's not better than Jackson Dart. He's probably not more talented than Austin Simmons, but what he does might be better for the Ole Miss offense.
Well, what you just described is the hallmark of a great coach, being able to adapt your scheme to the players you have. A lot of coaches are too hard-headed and they don't want to do that, and they only want to recruit players who can adapt to their scheme. But in this era of college football where you have so many players moving around in the transfer portal, you can't always do that. And this is a great example. I mean, Austin Simmons was going to be the heir apparent to Jackson Dart. Lane Kiffin does his due diligence, goes and gets a player like Trinidad Chambliss. All of a sudden, he's thrust into a starting role. And what do? They say, yes, let's run the plays and run the scheme that are tailored to this player, and specifically being he moves better than Austin Simmons. He adds an element of mobility. But I'll tell you what I like most about Trinidad Chambliss is he makes the right decision with the football. He's on time. He's accurate. He takes free release when it's given. He has the arm strength. He's mobile when he needs to. And, I mean, the numbers sort of reflect what I'm describing here, what nearly 65% completion percentage, 13 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions. I think he's added another 6 rushing touchdowns on the ground with several hundred rushing yards. Again, a complete player who doesn't press, who does the right things. You combine that player with the sort of play calling and scheming that Lane Kiffin provides. Well, there's a reason they've lost one football game, Steven.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I'm most impressed about Trinidad Chambliss this season is this is nothing against Jackson Dart. This is nothing against Austin Simmons at all. None whatsoever. But last year when Ole Miss struggled, when they lost games, you would look at the box score and it'd be Trey Harris with 13 catches and the next leading receiver has 2. When you looked at the beginning of the season with Austin Simmons, it was Trey Wallace having 8, 9, 10 catches and the next player having 2 or 3. And that was happening. With Trinidad Chambliss, the leading receiver has 5 and then there's 3 receivers that have 4, and then there's somebody with 3. I mean, he's doing a good job playing point guard. I like to describe him as an athletic game manager because Ole Miss is excellent in 2 minute. Ole Miss is excellent in 4 minute, and he's just distributing the ball around and finding the open players.
Well, if you're a quarterback, what better comp would you want than point guard? Right. That's what you're supposed to do, is distribute the football efficiently. And he's doing that. And he's finding a lot of different weapons. And a large part of that, too, is Kewan Lacey coming on strong. The way he's running the football, if Ole Miss and if he and Ole Miss as a whole can continue to run the football this effectively, which is a staple of these Lane Kiffin schemes and offenses, then that's going to do nothing but open up that passing game even more. And they complement each other, right? The more efficient and accurate that Trinidad Chambliss can be down the field, the more that then opens up the run game. And when both of those are happening, Lane Kiffin has everything at his disposal. My one concern for Ole Miss, particularly if they move into the college football playoff or find themselves in the SEC championship, is on the defensive side of the ball, and particularly with stopping the run. Now, they bowed up at times, and I do think it is a unit that has gotten better and better. I just wonder, what are your thoughts if Ole Miss finds themselves, let's say, hosting a playoff game? You think it's going to be wild in Oxford hosting Florida. What if they're hosting a playoff game in the first round? Are they going to be able, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, to really bow up and challenge a team that may be visiting like an Indiana, or let's say if Lincoln Riley's coming to town from USC with that offense that they have?
Yeah, if Ole Miss hosted a playoff game, that's the biggest football game in the state of Mississippi's history. That's not just the biggest game in Ole Miss history at that point. I am concerned when Ole Miss in run defense, when a team like Georgia is on the other side that can line it up and do the physical old style running the football like Mike Bobo. I'm not nearly as worried about a Lincoln Riley, because when Ole Miss has faced the air raid type teams out there, they've kind of eaten them up. They ate up Oklahoma. They've done pretty well. I'm concerned about physical running game, but if Ole Miss wins their last 2 games, they're pretty much at worst guaranteed a home playoff spot, and they're probably going to be the 5 team playing against the G5, essentially. So
Possibly.
So the question would be, to me, if Ole Miss gets that and they do what they're supposed to do against the G5, who is matched up against Ole Miss in the quarterfinals? Is it a Texas A&M? Is it Alabama? Because I do think Ole Miss versus Alabama would be a bad matchup for Alabama.
Well, in that scenario, Ole Miss is going to need another loss from Georgia, which, look, they host Texas this weekend, but because there could be a scenario where Georgia has the head-to-head over Ole Miss, and if they both only have 1 loss and they're boxed out of the SEC championship game with Alabama and let's just say Texas A&M, then it might be hard for them to jump and get that 5 seed. But either way, if you're 5 or 6 or 7, like you said, if first off, make the college football playoff, and then if you're hosting a game, you're talking about the biggest game in the state of Mississippi. USC and Lincoln Riley is really interesting because everything you just said, I would have agreed with a couple weeks ago. And then I watched Michigan, who is a power run team and who runs it very well, go out to USC, and USC bullied them on both sides of the ball. King Miller had over 160 yards rushing. He's really come on strong. Lincoln Riley is trying to do a lot of the things that Lane Kiffin wants to do, which is run the football effectively to be able to spread up, to be able to use some of those spread tendencies within the offense. Now, I think the best counter to that would be USC plays much better in Los Angeles. And in the scenario we're talking about, they would have to travel to Oxford, and they haven't played well on the road. But then again, they still have a lot of games left too. They're going to have to go to Eugene. If they lose to Oregon, it's going to be a moot point anyway.
Yeah, and also, how great would that be to have a playoff game with Lane Kiffin hosting USC?
I mean, not only just from his history of coaching there, but just imagine Lane Kiffin and Lincoln Riley both calling plays in the same game. Just from a quarterback's perspective, and I host a segment here called Huddle Up on Crane and Company. I mean, I would just have a field day watching those two scheme against each other.
All right, so when we come back, we're going to talk to David real quick. We're going to talk coaching carousel because we have to talk coaching carousel, but we're going to hit that subject with David Cohn right after this. But first, I do want to let you know the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel. even if you miss the start of the game and you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets to use around the app when you win that first $5 bet. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Dave, and one thing that is interesting, we have to talk coaching carousel a little bit. So how do you think this shakes out for Lane Kiffin? Where do you think he's going to be the head coach of in 2026?
Well, I don't know him personally, and I don't want to speculate, beyond just giving you my opinion. I think he's going to be at Ole Miss. And the reason I say that, and again, I have no inside information. I don't know the guy personally, but he's had head coaching jobs at the biggest brands in college football, with Tennessee and USC, like we just talked about. He's had a head coaching job in the NFL with the Raiders. He's done that. Now, if someone wants to say, well, this version of Lane Kiffin, this mature version of Lane Kiffin hasn't done that yet with a chance to go win a national championship in this expanded college football playoff era, and let's just go see what he could do at Florida or LSU and win a championship. I understand it. I don't think anyone would fault him. I just look at the situation right now with Ole Miss. And not that I think of Ole Miss as necessarily a lesser program, but I do think that the standards are different, where Lane Kiffin could carve out a very nice career for himself and end his coaching career in Oxford with winning like he has done, right? And that maybe that doesn't mean a national championship, or maybe if he got one and that was all that he got, that would be enough. Not getting run out like LSU just ran out Brian Kelly, or sort of the revolving door that we've seen there in Gainesville. He seems like he's happy. There's obviously a personal element with the kids and stuff. I'm really excited to see how this shakes out. I did see one funny tweet this past week because his name's gotten brought up so much, which was, I can't wait to see Lane Kiffin coach the 8 different SEC teams he's going to be coaching at in 2026.
Yeah, it's even started up as popping up on NFL boards with like the New York Giants, and like if the Miami Dolphins eventually come open, his name will be on that one too.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's an element that, when we talk about Steve Sarkisian with his NFL background, or Lincoln Riley was always a candidate that's like, hey, if any of these guys no longer want to be in college football because they've always dreamed of coaching in the NFL or going back to the NFL. And look, I say the same thing about Jim Harbaugh. He could have stayed at Michigan. He could have ended his coaching career at Michigan. He won a national championship, but that desire to go back and try and win a Super Bowl was just too great. And no Michigan fans fault him after, the run that he had there at Michigan. If any of those guys like Lane Kiffin or Steve Sarkisian or Lincoln Riley want to go try that, then no one can fault him for that. But I think college football is better when we keep guys like Lane Kiffin in college football.
Now, getting away from Ole Miss for just a second, I was thinking about it. All of the mess that's going on in Louisiana at LSU, the latest of which is the athletic director LSU is saying that Scott Woodward did not have the authority to hire or fire, and he did not have the authority to negotiate a settlement on the back end, and that they want to fire Brian Kelly with cause. How is this helpful for them finding the next coach?
No, this is not helpful. I mean, remember when they were able to lure Brian Kelly away from Notre Dame, the winningest coach in Notre Dame history, it was, hey, there's an appeal to come coach at LSU, where we're the biggest school in the state. You can put a recruiting fence up around this, and the last 3 head coaches have won national championships, right? And there's a big appeal to that. Now you've run him off in this fashion. You signed the paper that said you owe him $53 million or whatever it is. And now you're either trying to say, well, we didn't technically fire him. We just don't want him to coach the football team anymore because we don't want to trigger a buyout. Okay, well, that's not appealing to someone else who would want to come in and coach. Or you're trying to do worse than that, which you brought up, and you're trying to fire him for cause. And this just makes me think of the Michael Scott line from The Office, like because he didn't win football games. Like, that's not how this worked. You signed that contract. That's the buyout. Now, these buyouts are absolutely ridiculous. but that's what it took to be able to lure away the winningest coach in Notre Dame history. Now you've wanted to part ways with him. You have to deal with that. So I think LSU is really just shooting themselves in the foot with this thing, man.
Yeah, and you look at it, the governor, he started his press junket tour essentially when it started saying, I don't want the taxpayers to be on the hook for a buyout, which the taxpayers don't pay to buyouts. That's usually the boosters. But in this case, now the boosters would play the buyout, but the taxpayer money is going to pay the lawyers to go to court and fight all of this stuff. So honestly, the taxpayers are paying a buyout part of it right now.
Yeah, we had our buddy Matt Moscona from down there in Baton Rouge on our show, and it's not just Brian Kelly's buyout, right? You got Brian Kelly plus the assistant coaches. Then you got to go hire a new head coach who also has to hire assistant coaches. And so when all said and done, you're looking at north of $100 million to make this move. So I don't know, like, how do you think all this is going to shake out? Obviously, you must be fairly close with Lane Kiffin and the program. I mean, he seems to be the linchpin for the entire country. Is he going to remain at Ole Miss?
I think so. Honestly, he would be crazy to leave Ole Miss because he needs whatever he needs, he gets. There's no button at Ole Miss right now for him. He can go deep sea fishing in the middle of spring practice if he wants to do that. I mean, he can literally do whatever he wants to do. Now, the thing that concerns me and the threat that I think you need to pay attention to is if the Miami Dolphins comes open and there's a mutual interest there, because it is a party where both sides have to be interested. But I do think in that case, Lane Kiffin's going to listen to absolutely everything. But I am more worried about the NFL because let's say Ole Miss makes a playoff run and they win the first game and the second game they lose to where their season ends January 2nd. Well, Florida can't do that. LSU can't do that. That's too long. That's blowing away the transfer portal window. But making a hire on January 15th, the NFL's been doing that for about 75 years.
Yeah, and look, if Lane Kiffin really wants to coach in the NFL, then the timeline and the schedule is not going to matter. This is what I was saying with Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. Granted, that situation was a little more convoluted because there was a contract thing going on, and then obviously Michigan was under investigation too, and there seemed to be some animosity with the AD and Jim Harbaugh. But the same point remains. Like, this guy went to a Super Bowl with the 49ers, barely lost to his brother. That desire is not leaving you to want to go win that. So if Lane Kiffin has the same sort of desire, then it's not going to matter if it's the Miami Dolphins or some other, situation. He's going to go take that NFL job, at which point I would think if you're an Ole Miss fan, that wouldn't sting as badly, right? If your head coach is leaving for the NFL rather than Florida or LSU and these programs that you have such a rivalry with and that you're going to have to play, that's not anywhere in the same ballpark to me.
Yeah, and also all of the work that happened at Ole Miss to get Ole Miss so aligned that made it so appealing right now, everybody knows about that. It's not like it's a secret. So we'll see what happens. Hey, what have you got going on at Crane & Company this week?
Well, we're talking football, man. I would encourage everybody to go watch our YouTube channel, Crane & Company, over there with my co-hosts Jake and Blaine. We got a preview of Alabama hosting Oklahoma. This game has coined a term in my household, which is return the favor, because Oklahoma kept Alabama out of the college football playoff last year, and now Bama has an opportunity to do that to Oklahoma. We've got a preview of Georgia and Texas that we put out today. That's going to be a heck of a game. Again, Texas with 2 losses there, backs against the wall. And tomorrow we're going to have our Week 12 pick'em. I think J.D. Piquel from On3 is coming in for us to do that. So please, everyone, navigate over there to our YouTube channel at Crane & Company and give us a like and a subscribe.
All right, you heard the man, David Cohn from Crane & Company. Thank you so much for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports news. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy breaks down the best conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.